Knicks are a rival in the Eastern Conference, but have they provided a possible template for Miami next season? Plus, Tyler Herro's future with the Heat might be in doubt. So what does the team do next? And does Miami need to add more size? We'll answer all that and more in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always, it's credentialed Heat media member David Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to us on your podcast app, please leave us a 5-star review. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. We're going to take a few more of your listener questions later in the show, including one about Tyler Herro's future. But David, you and I were talking before we started recording here. You brought up an interesting point that there could be something about the Knicks playoff run that could be a template of sorts for the Heat going forward. What did you mean by that?
No, I just think a lot of people are drawing parallels between New York's run, and it's been such a wild ride because I don't know if you saw Game 2 in their win against the Indiana Pacers, and they are so chaotic, and they've lost Julius Randle, they've lost Bogdanovich, they've lost Mitchell Robinson, and yesterday Brunson goes out with a foot injury early on, and then OG Anunoby gets hurt midway through the game as well, and somehow, despite a double-digit deficit to Indiana, they wind up finding a way to come back and winning pretty easily against those same Pacers. So there's just some kind of crazy chaos energy right now that's working at Madison Square Garden, and it just seems to be benefiting this team. And I think a lot of people see that group and say, you know what, they're a really fun, interesting team to watch. I know there's probably some older fans that view the Knicks as still a heated rival and everything else, but despite that rivalry, you can still appreciate perhaps some of the stylistic similarities between Miami. And I think some people started viewing that as, well, maybe this is a possible template for Miami in terms of being able to move forward and have the same kind of plucky team with basically role models and building a roster around their star player with just high-level role players. And I saw this argument on social media, so I'll cop to it 100%. I know a lot of people were talking about this on social media, and maybe that's not necessarily the best place to get a specific topic or a way of analyzing these teams or anything like that.
Yeah, but if it gets your brain going.
Yeah, it just made me think about that. And honestly, though, I don't see it. Like, I think New York is fine. I think they're a really fun, good team to watch, etc. I don't think they're better than Miami. And I know some people will argue that based on what we saw from the Heat this past season, but considering, that New York has taken on the Pacers and, they're not exactly a great team either. As fun as they are offensively, they're just as bad defensively. And I'm drawing a blank there. Who do they face in the first round? Oh, the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid. Yeah. They faced Joel Embiid and the 76ers team, and they beat them. So, I don't know that they've proven anything that they're a sufficiently great team. And this isn't a knock on the Knicks or anything like that. This isn't about, the Knicks. I don't care what path they take to the Eastern Conference Finals, if in fact they wind up getting there or anything like that. There's no asterisk for me in terms of there's no big Knicks fan back there. I mean, let her chime in if she wants to.
Opinion.
To me, I just think that the Knicks have taken advantage of whatever opponents they face, and that's fine. But I don't see that roster and see that as constructed much better than Miami. And that's something that we've kind of forgotten, is that Miami made their move in acquiring Terry Rozier. Had they had their full complement of players, they probably would have been able to duplicate some of last year's success, or at least stylistically, they would have been very similar, at least from what my perspective is, to what we're seeing in New York. You've got a one-man player, basically a superstar in Jalen Brunson, a guy who plays top 5 in MVP voting. And he was a really, really good player during the course of the regular season. He's been phenomenal in the playoffs. And then you're getting some great, strong performances from a supporting cast. That's how it should be. The problem with Miami is they didn't have that superstar. They didn't have that star level player. And certainly they didn't have it during the regular season, but they didn't have it during the postseason the way they've had over the last 5 seasons too, which is Jimmy Butler. And that's part of the problem, is that they didn't have Jimmy Butler available, so that there wasn't a natural hierarchy for everybody to kind of excel in their role as those complementary role players. So I don't know. Do you see that Knicks team and be like, oh, this is something that Miami can potentially duplicate in terms of maybe building a roster out similarly or acquiring more high-level role players than the ones that they currently have on the roster?
Well, I do watch the Knicks, and I say that's what the Heat wanted to be this year. They embody that culture this year more than the Heat did. And Jalen Brunson played 77 games in the regular season. Jimmy Butler played 60, and that's a big part of the point you made about having that star player at the top so that everybody else could slide into a more natural role. That's how you end up with Tyler Herro trying to run your offense against the Boston Celtics, right? Like, Tyler Herro is a good player. He's not the number one scorer on a serious title contender. And so, but Jalen Brunson is, and Jimmy Butler, when he's healthy, is and has been. But what the Knicks are doing right now is very similar to what the Heat did do last year. I agree with that part. Like, if we're talking about the Heat copying the Knicks are kind of copying what the Heat did, right? Like, the Knicks right now, they're shooting 39% from three in the playoffs. That's what the Heat shot last year in the playoffs. You had Jimmy Butler playing at a Michael Jordan playoff Jimmy level, heroic stuff, just like what you're seeing from Jalen Brunson right now, and then unreal, kind of out of this world performances by guys like Caleb Martin and Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and all these guys, right? That all stepped up at the exact right time. The Knicks are really good. And both, by the way, you had Eric Spoelstra, great coach, Thibodeau, great coach, right? So you had good, strong leadership in both of those situations too, which is worth including. But that was last year and this year. Going forward, I do think that there's a lesson the Heat can learn from what the Knicks have done. And to me, the Knicks, everything changed for New York between last trade deadline and this trade deadline, when they started sending out some of their players that didn't necessarily fit with what they were trying to accomplish and got players who did. So over those last few years, they go out and get a Dante DiVincenzo. They go out and get OG Anunoby. They're trading Emmanuel Quickley out. They're doing things like that. Young players who they liked, Quentin Grimes out. What did they ended up doing is they constructed a roster where nobody's a bad defender. There is not a weak defender in that lineup. And everybody complements their star player, Jalen Brunson. And that was and they didn't trade future draft picks away to do it, which is the most impressive thing. So they maintain all of their flexibility so that they can pounce perhaps at the star who makes sense that complements their current in-house star in Brunson. And I think the Heat can definitely learn from that. As opposed to trading away picks and all these things, not getting married to some of the young players who you've grown and developed in-house, and admitting these are good players, but maybe they're not the right fit for us right now, and we've got to trade them out to go get the players who are fits. And maybe it is a little bit of, like, not necessarily higher level role players. I don't like, not better role players, but just better fits for what you're trying to do. And I think that's what the Knicks realized and understood and accomplished, right? I think Emmanuel Quickley is an awesome player, but they were like, it just doesn't work. He needs the ball. We've already got Jalen Brunson. We need a guy who makes sense for this. So they traded him. Yeah. And so I think the Heat going forward, if they're trying to remake the roster, can learn from that. We have seen now 2 years in a row, David, lineups with multiple bad defenders in those lineups that other teams, high-level teams, just pick on and pick on and pick on. And it's costed the Heat maybe chances at winning a championship because those weak spots just get bigger and bigger on the bigger stage that you get to. And the Knicks don't have that. There's not a player in their lineup that you can just pick on the way that you could pick on some of these guys that have been in the Heat's lineup over the last few years. I think the Heat would like to have that. I really do.
You kind of need a positional glut, something that I remember, I've seen over the time is like you have teams sometimes, and especially when they go through the path of rebuilding and tanking to some degree and getting these high draft picks, and you just kind of take the best player available, right? Regardless of fit, you just want to get these guys on there. So Miami just never had that luxury. They've just been able to take whatever players are available and then build up guys through the G League and through their own developmental system and everything else like that. So they rarely, I can't even think of they don't have positional glut. Like they have, they do. In what position?
Well, I don't know if it's a glut. Glut's a big word, but I think there's some redundancies on the roster in terms of, okay, you've got Terry Rozier, Duncan Robinson, and Tyler Herro. And you even heard Pat Riley at the press conference say, like, kind of hint at Spoelstra might have to figure out if one of those guys between Rozier and Tyler is a sixth
That's
man in the future. And then there's that
that's
whole
fine.
Duncan
That's
Robinson
fine.
versus Tyler Herro thing. And that's sort of what I mean.
The,
Like,
the Rozier acquisition, yeah. I mean that also happened, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. So I mean
right.
that I can't. I'm trying to think of like what that path is for Miami now that they have this glut. If that's the case, and you want to look at it from that perspective, and that's totally fine, then the obvious move then is to probably try and start exploring trades for Tyler Herro and or Rozier. And I don't know that. I don't think Rozier is the most likely name to get moved. I think it's probably Herro, and that's
Oh.
the piece then that you have to start trading Tyler Herro to get those kinds of assets for that next move. It's kind of like the hockey assist of transactional moves.
I don't know that it is. You might be able to make that move right now. We've got a question about Tyler Herro's future and what the Heat could potentially trade him for from a listener. We're going to get to that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by America's #1 fantasy sports app. That's PrizePicks. With over 3 million members, it's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on all the action you watch with your favorite sports and players. You pick more or less on 2 or more player stats, and you just watch the winnings roll in. My PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. PrizePicks even offers injury insurance so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For basketball games, you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return the second, kind of like what we thought Jalen Brunson would do in the Knicks game yesterday and what OG Anunoby wound up doing for the Knicks. PrizePicks will have your back and not count that as a loss. PrizePicks now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this basketball season too. So if you want to go make a little, find a little, again, stat projection and maybe place a little wager on that, download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Today's episode is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. And eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Let's get to this question that we didn't get to yesterday. It's about Tyler Herro's future. This one comes from Coach. Not sure what Coach.
Tony Fiorentino?
Yeah, probably. If Miami can bring a star in, if Miami cannot bring a star in, what high-level role players do you think that they could try to get for Tyler Herro in a trade? Kind of a two-parter there. And we could explore whether or not the Heat can trade Tyler Herro for a star. You and I are skeptical, and I think rightly so, because the Heat have tried to trade Tyler Herro for the last couple of years for a star, and it hasn't worked. Now, that does not necessarily mean that it won't work just because it hasn't worked, but it's been tougher than maybe they've expected. And I don't know that based on what we've seen this year from Tyler Herro playing just 42 games and then what we saw in the playoffs from him, that his value has gone up since then, right? So I'm going to just...
You say it's maintained. Yeah, you say it's maintained, or you think his value is of equal to what it was last offseason. I disagree. I think it's kind of down a little bit. But if you're looking for a package of players, whatever Miami may or may not have been able to offer or was theoretically going to offer Portland for Damian Lillard, if it's Jaime Jaquez and Niko Jovic, well, those players' value has increased. So in kind of the aggregate, maybe Miami's potential trade package for a star might actually be better than what it was last offseason, despite Tyler's struggles in the playoffs.
I think the perception from other NBA teams, I think you're exactly right, David. I don't know that the Heat, if the Heat thought that Tyler Herro was like a Tyrese Maxey type of centerpiece in a deal last summer, I don't, and I think this is borne out to be correct, I don't think any other team thought that. But I think the perception from the rest of the league is that package, I guess we can call it the Damian Lillard package, Tyler Herro, Jaime Jaquez, Nikola Jovic, and whatever picks, has probably gone up in value as a total package than it was last summer, because we saw what Jovic is, and we saw certainly what Jaquez is. And even though the Heat did trade one of those picks for Rozier, they get another pick because of the 7-year rule. And so now they're able to trade a 2031 pick that they weren't able to trade last year. So that's there. So we'll see, right? And then it's new stars and it's new names and it's different GMs that you're dealing with who aren't Joe Cronin and all these things that, so perhaps you are able to just sort of take that package and shop it around and say, can we get a star that we could put next to Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo? And that is certainly plan A, I would think, right? Maybe it's not the whole package, maybe it's a little bit of it or whatever it is, but we're going to try to figure out what star can we go get, because that's just what the Heat have done over the last 2 years. If that doesn't happen, then I do think that the Heat have to maybe come to that realization. I think that they have, that the promise that they made to Tyler Herro last year, that we won't trade you unless it's for a future Hall of Famer, Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard, those kind of guys.
Sure.
I think they're going to have to back off of that. And
do you think they actually made that promise?
Yes. And, whatever a basketball promise is,
Sure,
they told it to Tyler and his agent.
Okay, fair enough.
That we're not going to trade you unless it's for like one of those top 75 players of all times caliber guys. Mm-hmm. And, you could sort of finesse it too and be like, well, Donovan Mitchell could get there one day, maybe he's one, And so there's a way to sort of, there's a gray area even in that, isn't there? But I think to the point of the question though, like if it's not Donovan Mitchell, if it is just something less, it kind of gets back to the original thing that we were talking about with the Knicks. They moved their guy, RJ Barrett, taken in the same draft. They moved RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley to go get somebody who made sense for their roster, OG Anunoby. And it took some stuff, but OG Anunoby is not going to be a Hall of Famer. He's not going to be a top 75 player of all time, but he's a very high-level role player, a very good player. Is there a version of that where the Heat could say, okay, here's a Tyler Herro and one other asset, if it takes that other asset, whatever it is, you know what I mean? And let's move that for maybe a player that's not necessarily even as good or materially better or certainly not like future Hall of Fame level upgrade, but just fits what we're trying to do better right now.
I'd love to see it. I mean, I think OG obviously there's the contractual issue similar to what we're seeing in Miami.
And that was the thing with Anunoby is like the Toronto was like, we need like 1 million first-round picks, and they're like, actually he's going to leave in a year, so we'll take RJ Barrett. That's fine.
Right, and I think it was a good move by Toronto. It was
fine.
I think Anunoby's probably of the players involved the better player.
Yes,
but New York got Precious Achiuwa too, and I mean he's a fine backup role player again.
Yeah, but the point is there a deal like that? Where
so.
I mean, who knows? It's impossible to tell.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who that complimentary player is. I don't know who that guy is.
Yeah, okay, that's a good conversation then, right? It's if you're going to sort of redistribute the one-way scorer guy that Tyler Herro is into another team need. What is that team need? I do think actually the Heat need another wing defender. Caleb Martin, Haywood Highsmith, those guys are free agents. We don't know what their futures are. So you might need more length, right, on the perimeter.
That's fair.
So, you're not getting Anunoby, but who's out there that could be that type of player? I think that player would be very beneficial to Miami. I think they need somebody who's good at defense, potentially a stretch 5 that can maybe help Bam move to power forward if that's something that they're serious about doing, or even just a new power forward who's a little bit more of a veteran and ready to play in the playoffs and that kind of guy. Like those are the things that I'm thinking about, or even a new starting 2 guard who's more of a two-way guy. I think to me, I'd be looking for a defensive-leaning two-way wing who is not necessarily as skilled with the ball in his hands as Tyler Herro is, not an off-the-dribble threat, but you don't necessarily need that guy because you have Terry Rozier now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know who that is.
No,
but that's sort of the
model. I agree with you. I think kind of addressing the question that we're talking about in the next segment. To me, it would probably be somebody better suited to play the 4 spot not a knock on Nico, but I think you could slide him down to the 3. You can slide Jimmy down to the 2 even. I mean, I know that's kind of
I kind of love that. Get big.
That's a much bigger lineup there. You got Terry Rozier starting, likely. You got Donovan I'm sorry, you got that was
the script. You got the script. David's got the script.
Freudian slip there. No, you get Duncan coming off the bench and whatever other role players you're able to keep.
Easily mistakable.
Potentially.
Duncan
yeah. Duncan Robinson, Donovan Mitchell, Tomato. Right. So similar style of play. I think even Duncan would get a kick out of that comparison. But anyway, I think you want more. You need more size, but that versatility defensively that you're talking about, certainly. But I mean, Anunoby is just like he's kind of a one of one, really, like, which is what made his value, despite the contract issue.
Right.
I think he had such high value, like a guy that you can kind of throw out there. He's a great defender. I mean,
I don't know that he's one of one. I just don't. Maybe his situation was one of one. Is that more what you meant? Because he had that contract issue and Toronto was a little motivated, knowing that he's not going to resign there.
How many 1 through 5 defenders are there?
Oh, I mean, that's fair. Like Herb Jones would be the other guy, but New Orleans is not trading Herb Jones, so
exactly.
He's like the next Anunoby, isn't he? And so, and you can, but. A two-way wing to me is what you would need to be looking for. I got a list of teams that could be looking for a 6-man type in Tyler Herro, and I think that's just sort of what his value across the league is going to be. It's like, okay, he's not going to be their main driver of your offense, but if the Heat shop him as a guy, and you know how I feel about Tyler Herro. I love Tyler Herro. I don't want to really see him go, but if the Heat really do need to make these kind of tweaks around the roster, then you have to shop him as a 6th man. Not as the next star guard in the NBA. And if you do that, I think actually the field opens up in terms of what you can move him for. I think a team like Toronto makes a lot of sense for Herro. Memphis, Charlotte, Orlando, Detroit, the New Orleans Pelicans, depending on what happens with their whole thing. But they always need more scoring off the bench. Sacramento, because they're probably going to be losing Malik Monk. I think the Spurs could definitely use some scoring in the backcourt and some help there. So these are just teams that I just came up with that could use a guy like Tyler Herro. Now, how motivated are those teams to actually make a trade? What would they be willing to give up? That's a whole other story. But that to me is sort of the model, and I think you and I agree. Just more size, more stuff like that. We're going to keep talking about that when we get to another listener question after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. And the more you win together, the more awesome the prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, from unique stickers that you can trade with a friend to complete albums for big prizes. You can get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win on Rent Frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you've not hit that like button on YouTube, do that right now. Hit that subscribe button. We are still coming to you 5 days a week throughout the offseason to break down everything that's going on. And boy, there's some storylines. There's some things happening here in Miami.
We didn't have an offseason. We didn't have the dog days really are August. Like,
yeah,
either the free agency's over, the trade has happened, there's mini camp is, media day is building up. Like, it's like the last weeks of August, first weeks of September, and that's kind of like when you're really struggling.
Everybody's on vacation. Nobody to talk to.
Yeah. Other than that, you got the draft, you got free agency. There's a lot of stuff coming up, so you want to be here. Best podcast in the country.
Yeah, we're starting our draft prep too, so we're gonna the best podcast in the whole country.
Damn
regardless of genre. Take that, Serial.
Yeah. True crime. Yeah, who cares?
Adrian writes in, looking at teams in the playoffs playing bigger and more athletic, and with Nico getting the nod late in the season, do we begin to see Spo in the front office reimagine what Bam and another big would look like as part of a deep dive that Riley called for this offseason? I'm gonna be honest, David. I think this already happened a little bit. I
In what
think.
way?
Well, I think you can even go back to the Nikola Jovic draft pick. They took him at 27. They said, yeah, we need more size. We need a guy who could be a future front court partner with Bam. And that's internally how they thought of that pick, right? And they sort of build it to anybody who they would talk to is like, yeah, we think Nico in a few years could be the long-term fit next to Bam Adebayo. Now, did they imagine that Jovic would be starting playoff games for them in his second year? Probably not. And that's why you hear everybody talk so highly of Nikola Jovic right now. But I do think that was an acknowledgement that they need to add more size. And heck, you could even go back to the Precious Achiuwa pick 2 years before that as, hey, let's go get a guy who could potentially add more size to our front court, maybe play with Bam, maybe play behind Bam, but we're going to add more size to this roster. And then obviously the Kyle Lowry thing becomes available and they trade him for him. But and even the Jaime Jaquez pick, not a front court guy, but I remember asking Pat Riley in the end of season press conference last year, what's your team need? And he said, we need more length on the wing. That's what we need. And then a month later, they went ahead and drafted Jaime Jaquez, who's more length on the wing and strong and physical and all these things. So I think that the Heat have been operating in this way for a few years now. I do think that they need to maybe tilt the dials a little bit more even further. And I do wonder if we're at that point. I don't know what you think, but
no, I think that's. I think so. I don't know that the Heat views it that way. Like to your point, maybe they feel like they've made those kind of upgrades, but I think from the fans watching this team and watching them get out rebounded and bullied around to a certain degree, and watching Bam play out of position, really not necessarily play out of position, have a tremendous challenge to have to guard 1 through 5 and then still be expected to pick up bigs as easily as he can. And
Bam's not out of position in 25 against 25 opponents in the league. Bam is not out of position, but when he plays the Bucks and the Nuggets and the Sixers, then it becomes more glaring.
Right.
And those are the teams, right? Those are the teams that you presumptively had to get through.
So
maybe the Timberwolves now.
I guess we're specifically looking at probably somebody 6'11" and bigger. Like I think that's the size that fans are looking for. So an upgrade over at the center position. Yeah. And I don't. There aren't a lot, and even the ones that are available. Like Nico is close to that point, and nobody would. Again, he made leaps and bounds defensively and pulling down rebounds and things of that sort. But no one's going to confuse him for a center, even though he played out of position that way in the G League Skyforce team. But I just don't think that's his future either. So, you've got very few of those options. And as the floor stretches for all positional players, I don't think the idea of that typical big, you're going to find less and less of those available. But having said all that, I think that's what Miami should be looking to improve on their roster. Is somebody, again, that can be a complementary player that can add similar size to Bam Adebayo in that front court because they desperately need it.
Yeah, I don't know if it necessarily even needs to be a guy who moves Bam to power forward, but could just be another big body who can help Bam sort of bolster the muscle
like OG
quota in the front court.
Like Anunoby.
Like what PJ Tucker did for a year, honestly. They had it for a year. And a player like that would make a lot of sense for the Heat to have on the roster. And yeah, like you said, how do you get that player is a whole other question. But I do think that it's something that the Heat are seriously considering. And yeah, I know that Pat Riley said that Udonis Haslem doesn't speak for the organization when he goes on First Take and says that maybe we can add another veteran big next to Bam Adebayo, but I kind of think he does. I kind of think Haslem is saying something that a lot of people in that front office are thinking. I don't know that I want Bam. I don't know that it has to be a star player. I don't know that they have to go out and get Miles Turner, and who does not strike me as available. But, somebody making $20 million a year is my point. But if you can get a guy on the mid-level exception or something, who you don't feel because of what he's getting paid that he has to start in every matchup or has to play at end of games, but you could start at the start of games and have Bam at power forward just to reduce the wear and tear on him for 82 games so that he can be healthy when the finals come around and when the playoffs come around. Yeah. I think even that would go a long way. It doesn't have to be this big, splashy, oh my God, what a great front court the Heat have. It just has to be an option, a body, a something, somebody.
You've got Thomas Bryant coming back, and you've got Orlando Robinson coming back too. Both of them under contract, right?
So, yeah, Bryant's got the player option, but yeah.
It just didn't work out for them. And look,
something above this idea, something above that, who the career backups or sort of kind of guys, a legit, proven starter. PJ Tucker. Like, they had it right. They should have signed him to a longer contract. Something like that. Maybe a younger version of PJ Tucker who you could feel more comfortable signing to a legitimate 3 or 4 year deal, or trading for that player, or whatever, however you get that player. But,
I've always liked Jayshawn Tate.
He's small, man.
Is he too small?
He's like 6'5".
I mean,
and doesn't
he's
really
the same size as PJ Tucker.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, if we're gonna just be like, I mean, PJ Tucker is really one of one. What he's able to do at that size, I mean, it's crazy. I don't expect Jayshawn Tate,
right.
and he's listed at 6'4". I mean, I don't mind Jayshawn Tate, but that's not the answer at power forward. Like, if you get him, bring him off the bench, like that's something.
Right. I mean, that's not. Yeah, but it's just look. There's this idea one that Spo is kind of allergic to size, right? Like he just doesn't know how to play big men. He doesn't know how to incorporate them into the lineup. And I think when you're looking at, sorry, just reading the highlights here of the Phoenix Suns coaching carousel. That's a whole other story there. You see, talent doesn't guarantee anything, and it could get your coach fired, but that's a whole other story. When you're looking at Thomas Bryant, you're looking at Orlando Robinson. It's like just having 7-footers or close to 7-footers doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to have quality size either. And I think it all has to do with the defensive abilities. Like, you need those two guys.
Right.
I don't think their offense might not be great. It's all certainly not consistent, but you could leave them out on the floor if they just weren't getting played off the floor because of their defensive issues. And I think that's the problem.
That was sort of like, yeah, with the Kelly Olynyk's and the Myers Leonards. I mean, Spo has wanted this. This is they have had that.
It's on Whiteside because he could defend, that's the whole thing.
When Bam became the full-time starter, they paired him with Olynyk. They had Myers Leonard. Then they went to PJ Tucker, right? And there was a gap year where they didn't have PJ Tucker and they were playing Caleb Martin at that spot forever. And then they got Kevin Love on the buyout and then tried that, and then it didn't really work, and they ended up going back to going small. But all that's recent, and that's why we think like the Heat just run small. But even with Nikola Jovic ascending to that starting power forward spot was an acknowledgement of, no, we need 6'10" or bigger. We need a legit big man body next to Bam. Is Nico that guy? Perhaps. But I think that they always add to that too. I liked a little bit more optionality there and things like that. So we'll see. All right. That'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app.